spiders, dinosaurs, spider, dinosaurs, dinosaur, spiders. No matter the case, I vanquished them all and I earned every single achievement in Spidersaus. Now let me show you exactly how I did it. Although, let's just say I encountered a lot of hiccups along the way. Took me 6 hours. 290 deaths. Is that right? That can't be right? Spidersaus is a Contra-style run-and-gun shooter game which forces the player to battle hordes of nightmarish dinosaur spider-like hybrids that have run amok throughout the world, who you must defeat one by one before you inevitably encounter the final boss within each of its 5 main levels. Whenever the game was first announced and I found out that the title was going to be called Spidersaus, I couldn't immediately help myself but think of that awkward-looking Spider-Man dinosaur mashup Halloween costume that you can sometimes find on Amazon. Although in the end, I had total faith in the developers' way forward, since they are the ones responsible for the creation of my favorite video game series of all time, Shantae. And due to this fact, I was very excited to not only try to 100% the game, but obtain all of its achievements. Although I was a tad bit concerned due to the fact I never actually played any sort of Contra-style game before, and from my past experience, I know they're not typically very forgiving to new players. To prepare myself before I begin to attempt any 100% achievement challenge, I always first look to see if the game is a cross-platform title, because if so, I always want to first review the PlayStation Network Profiles website to see if they have any sort of achievement guide that I can follow before I blindly jump into the deep end. I always enjoy reviewing the PSN guides more than any other website, since they often provide an estimated time and level of difficulty required to try and obtain each of the achievements, along with the exact amount of playthroughs required. Since I was planning to make this my first ever YouTube challenge, I didn't want to choose a game that was going to be too overly difficult or take too long to complete with hours upon hours of grinding. Fallout. After reviewing the PSN Profiles guide for Spidersaus, I knew that it looked pretty manageable with a total of 18 achievements, an average difficulty spike of about a 4 out of 10, and would only take me 3 playthroughs and a measly 5 hours to complete in total to achieve all of the achievements. So keeping all of this in mind, I thought Spidersaus would be an absolute perfect pick for my first kick of the YouTube/achievement hunting can, and prepared for what I thought would be an absolute breeze of a challenge for such a Chad beast of a gamer like myself. To begin our challenge, we need to start our first playthrough of the story by attempting to beat all 5 of the main levels that are included within the game. The game starts out as any normal game should, by asking you exactly how you wish to have your steak prepared. Since the correct answer is always medium rare, I chose that as my option and began my journey. The next step is choosing your playable character. You have the option between Victoria, the spunky and sarcastic rock star, or Adrian, the strong and resourceful heartthrob. After about a millisecond of thought, I chose Victoria and moved onwards. After all of this, the game now begins and you're placed within Mission 0 or the tutorial level to learn all of the mechanics that will be used throughout the game. We quickly progress through the first stage, and I begin to learn, fail, and then eventually ignore all of the instructions that are provided to me above, as I always find the best strategy just mindlessly mashing buttons until I succeed. Without much thought though, we eventually obtain our first achievement in the list by shooting these floating robot fellas that drop weapon power-up. I quickly go over and pick up this power-up, which is for our current gun, the pea shooter. This stacks on top of our already existing gun, and now provides us with a level 2 pea shooter that we can use throughout the level. It also unlocks the first achievement of the game, powering up for stacking up a weapon. As we continue to progress throughout the remainder of the level, we eventually encounter the first boss of the game, Queen Spidersaur. The mechanics for this fight were nothing too complex, but after a bit of running in circles and blindly shooting in all directions, we managed to take her down fairly easily and achieved another 2 achievements at the same time. First, it was Star Cadet for completing a stage without dying, and Junior Intern for completing the tutorial level of the game. Now, after taking a sip of my coffee to celebrate my very first clean and flawless victory, I move onwards towards Mission 1, expecting nothing but an easy ride to the top of the mountain. Shooting, jumping, avoiding these green poop clouds that would spawn after killing these bug-like creatures, and just straight up blasting anything that I would encounter throughout my path. Although shortly into the stage, I earned my 4th achievement, Light Snack, by picking up the mini meat item, which has a random chance to drop after each individual kill and would fully heal my character back to full health. As we continue throughout the level, we reach about the halfway marker, where we start our first fight against a foe that will become far too familiar with throughout the game, this oversized brute of a cockroach. Although we do cut it close on our very first attempt, we eventually do take the dub, and I learned the lesson that this game is going to have a lot more coming at me than I originally expected. It was at this stage that I knew that I was going to start collecting not only achievements, but game over screens, as I continued to die and die and die as I try to learn the mechanics of each level. After a lot of strength, perseverance, and looking up guides on my second monitor without Twitch chat noticing, I finally made it to the last boss of Mission 1, the Combiner. Although I tried my best to be consistent and continue to rack up game over screen after game over screen, after a long lengthy battle and a lot of struggling, I eventually ended up learning the mechanics enough to pick up the dub and earn our 5th achievement of the game, Associate Intern, for successfully completing Episode 1. For a reward for defeating the Combiner, we received a new ability which will become critical throughout the remaining levels of the game, Double Jump. With this new ability in hand, we now move onwards towards Mission 2. After an additional sip of coffee, we battle on the back of a dinosaur, which eventually ends with us shooting this rhino elephant beetle-like creature enough times in the butt until he eventually bugs off and allows us to continue with the platforming section of this level. After some precision platforming and shooting, we eventually made it to the final boss of the level, the Weaver siblings. Although we made sure to keep up with our consistency and racked up several more game over screens first, we eventually beat the dynamic duo and earned our 6th achievement of the game, Senior Associate Intern, by beating the 2nd level of the game. As an award for beating the Weaver siblings, we now unlock the new ability Web Grapple, which gives us the ability to use a web to shoot upwards and attach to any platform that's above us. As we begin the 3rd level of the game, we breeze through everything like normal until we eventually encounter this armadillo-like creature that would curl up in a ball and bounce around the screen, just like one of those old school DVD screensavers where everyone would sit and wait for the exact moment that the logo would reach one of the corners of the screen. After having a lot more consistency, we eventually reached the final boss of the level, the Mixer Driller. The fight itself seemed fairly easy, except for I could never actually figure out how to get a proper angle to hit his eye and inflict damage. So after a lot of trial and error and help from Swift Strike Mike in my Twitch chat, I eventually clued in that I was meant to use my new ability, the Web Grapple, to grapple onto his panels whenever they open up and continuously shoot him in the eye. Although it took me several attempts, I eventually defeated this large foe and earned both achievements number 7 and 8 combined. Necessity, Mother of Impressive, for defeating a boss with only a level 1 pea shooter, and Intern, for completing level 3 of the game. For beating the Mixer, we earned an ability that I never actually used throughout the whole game and honestly forgot that I had, Ground Pound, which would do a bit of a shockwave whenever your character would land. With the Mixed Driller now behind us, we moved on to level 4, which had to be the most frustrating and head-rattling level of them all. I started off very quickly by keeping my consistency in check, and after a few running and gunning sections, we reached our next encounter versus a familiar foe. After a few attempts, we once again put him into the ground and continued onwards. It was at this stage where the death counter really started to climb. Each platforming section after this point turned into a side-scrolling mess, where not only did you have to time each jump perfectly to prevent yourself from falling off the screen or landing on an unseen enemy's head, but you also had to perform the 5 Ds of dodgeball by dodging, ducking, dipping, diving, and once again dodging every projectile and enemy that comes your way. It was at this point where, after a few attempts, I felt like this was going to be a very lengthy struggle, so I ended up ending my stream and looked forward to picking it up the next day. On the next day, with a fresh new set of runs, we finally managed to reach the final boss of this level, the Tunnel Terror. This boss was by far the most difficult boss that I had to fight in the whole entire game, and he would proceed by moving all around the map and shooting both projectiles and poop clouds that you had to avoid at all costs. After enough practice, I was finally able to do enough damage to bring him to the second phase of the fight, which felt very similar to the first phase. After going through the same motions and doing enough damage to end phase 2, the real fun begins. Phase 3 begins pretty harmlessly enough until a second tear pops out of the wall, and you're now stuck facing two of these hideous beasts, both with the exact same moveset. After a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, we finally managed to beat this phase and earned our 9th achievement, Senior Intern, for beating the 4th level of the game, and unlocked our next and best ability to date, Dino Dash, which would allow us to dash quickly from side to side to help avoid any enemy damage that stood in our way. Stage 5 for the most part felt a lot more chill and relaxed compared to the previous levels of the game. After some basic platforming, we once again find our rival Cockroach just hanging out and squish him just like the bug that he is. We continue to go through all the different platforming stages until we finally meet our little buddy once again before he meets an unfortunate end and we have to battle another familiar foe, but this time it's on her turf. The Queen Spidersaus fight is basically identical to the first time you fight her within Mission 0 of the game, but this time you don't have the fortunate event of being able to crawl into the vent under the ground to try and avoid the oncoming damage. After a few attempts, I managed to defeat her with an absolute flawless run and earned our next achievement, Dance Like You Want to Win, for defeating a boss without taking any damage. Now, if you were playing on the easiest difficulty, this is exactly where the story would end. Although, if you're playing on medium difficulty or higher, you have a lot more left to complete. After Queen Spidersaus is now defeated, you now need to face your friend and now turned enemy, Dr. Aracasortes. Overall, this fight isn't too bad, but after a bit of practice and a few failed attempts, I was able to beat it fairly easily. And doing so earns us our 11th achievement of the game, Paid Intern, for completing the 5th level of the game. We then move on to the final level of the game, the Culling Floor, and need to conquer the ultimate life form. This fight requires a ton of pinpoint accuracy jumps to avoid all of the projectiles that are thrown your way, along with using your Dino Dash to perfection to avoid the bouncing objects. It took me about 20 additional attempts before I finally managed to understand all of the patterns and officially beat the story and earn 2 additional achievements. The first achievement was called Part-Timer for completing the game's story mode, and the second achievement was Ingest's Finest for achieving the game's true ending. With all of this now behind me, I finally have successfully finished the story mode for Spidersaus within a total of 6 hours of gameplay and with a respectable 290 deaths. After finishing the story, I achieved a total of 13 achievements and have a total of 5 miscellaneous ones left to collect before I fully 100% the game. To begin our next saga, we had to set up a new playthrough of the story, but this time using the newly unlocked arcade mode. This game mode makes the game move a little bit quicker since it removes all the cutscenes and dialogue between each individual level. I chose to do this run on the easiest difficulty, Well Done, to make things a little bit easier on myself after such a sweat fest over the last few days. The next 2 achievements came fairly quickly throughout the tutorial level as we defeated our old friend Queen Spidersaus and achieved both stage presence, which requires us to be non-stop running throughout the whole entire level, and we're unable to stand still at all. And Dedication to a Fault for beating an entire level using the exact same weapon throughout. We continue to push ahead like normal throughout the story and eventually reach and defeat our old pal Queen Spidersaus and earn the Rockstar achievement for fully completing the arcade mode. We then once again start a new playthrough of the game on the easiest difficulty and continue replaying the tutorial level over and over until we're finally able to achieve the second last achievement in our list, Officer, for beating an entire stage without getting hit a single time. With all of this now behind us, we are now sitting at a total of 17 achievements earned, with only one last behemoth left in our way, One Shot Deputy, for completing the entire story without dying a single time. Seeing how throughout my first playthrough I died a total of 290 times, I knew this wasn't going to be an easy task to complete. During this achievement, you're allowed to take damage, but if you lose a single life, you're forced to restart your run. Thankfully, there's no difficulty requirement required for this achievement, so we're allowed to play on the easiest setting. As well, we also have the ability to somewhat save scum, as the game doesn't actually save your progress until you fully complete a level. So if at any point I lose a life, I can always just reload my save from the last checkpoint and keep going until the level is fully beaten without any lives lost, like nothing ever happened. With enough practice now under our belt from unlocking all of the other achievements, we made quick work of the tutorial level by knocking down Queen Spidersaus, followed by taking down the level 1 boss, the Combiner, and without any difficulties at all, we also took out the Weaver siblings and completed all of the stages up to level 2 without a single death. Now level 3 onward is where the difficulty would really start to ramp up for me. For the most part, the platforming sections were easy enough, but time after time I would struggle during the second phase of the mixed driller fight and would end up missing a jump or taking enough unnecessary damage to cause a life to be lost. Although after enough attempts and reloading of the last save point, we finally beat the mixed driller and continued onwards towards stage 4. As always, stage 4 was the most hair-pulling experience of my life. Going into this level, I knew the best approach was to try and obtain a level 2 shield to help soak up a lot of the random projectiles that was being thrown around by enemies. Although what I couldn't expect was the amount of times that I would accidentally pick up another power-up throughout the level and mistakenly override my shield power-up, which would basically cause me to instantly lose the level and need to restart. It took about 15 attempts, but we finally managed to do everything right and defeated the Twin Terrors to move on to the last stage. Thankfully, after completing that, the 5th stage is typically very easy and it's basically just a redo of the tutorial level, so we were able to quickly crush through it on our first attempt and earned ourselves the last achievement that we needed, One-Shot Deputy, for completing the entire story without a single death. I get it, I didn't screw up somewhere down the line. Oh, there's one health gone. Nice, nice, nice! Is that it? Did we get it? Nothing popped yet. Yeah, there we go. Complete the game without dying. Boom. And we 100%ed it on stream. And just like that, we fully 100%ed Spidersaus and obtained all of its 18 achievements in about 10 hours, which is unfortunately about double the amount of time PSN profile said it would take us. Also, what I'm assuming, probably about 250 more deaths than the average player.